Merry Christmas guys! You may remember last month I got a chance to see the launch of the Yotaphone 2. I had some brief time with the device and now I've finally got my hands on it. I'm excited to see just how good this device is outside of the showroom and whether that novelty, this e-ink display, still exists outside of that space. So today we are going to take a look at the Yotaphone 2. The design of the Yotaphone 2 surprises me. There are no markings adorning the front of the device, which immediately gives it a more sophisticated look, which is personally what I like to see on devices. The glass that sits on it is flat, but the surrounding frame and the shape of the phone accentuates this flatness. The whole device sees curves everywhere, the top, bottom, sides and back. The device has a shallow grey tonality to it, and this fits in well with what is Yotaphone 2's headline feature, the rear always-on e-ink display. The bezel and back blend into the matte e-ink display well and makes the whole presentation look natural for something that is quite unnatural. If someone saw the back of the device, it could easily be mistaken for the front. Whilst it does feel better holding it the normal way up, it doesn't feel bad holding it upside down. The device has a magnesium chassis with a glass fiber reinforced plastic outer surface. Both panels are covered in Corning Gorilla Glass 3, which should prove useful for the rear display, as it will be the side most susceptible to scratches and scuffs. The Yotaphone 2 comes in at 8.95mm at its thickest point, 144.9mm tall and 69.4mm wide. This all results in the device weighing in at 145 grams. The Nexus 5 here is a good comparison, as the two phones are very similar in terms of size. The Nexus 5 is 8.6mm thin and comes in at 130 grams, an imperceptible difference but something good to compare to regardless. Looking around the device, we have the headphone port at the top. The left hand side is void of any buttons or markings. On the right hand side we have the standby button, and above that we have the volume rocker, which in this case doubles as the nano SIM card slot. This may be a technical justification for having a screen on the back, but the resulting effect is a slight mushiness to the button presses. To some this may not matter, but coming from ceramic keys on the Nexus 5, there is a tangible difference. Finally, we have a single speaker on the bottom, even though there are grills indicating two, which is a shame really. We're left with the micro USB connection to finish it off. There is no denying that Yota have done a good job incorporating two screens into a device that feels remarkably similar to nearly every other phone out there. The display on the Yotaphone 2, well, two displays are both good. The front panel is an adequately bright 5-inch Full HD AMOLED display. The white balance is not too cold nor too warm, which is good and thusly provides a good experience, but it does slightly lean towards a green tint. The Nexus 5 again in comparison is slightly more red. There is no color shift at extreme angles, and the Yotaphone 2 only shows the slightest of contrast shifts at these extreme angles. It's a pleasing experience overall, but I'm sure you're interested to hear about the e-ink display. Modern smartphones and their screens use a lot of power, so the 4.5-inch e-ink touchscreen display should make for a highly efficient one, as it only uses power when refreshing. The panel comes in at 960 by 540 with 16 levels of grayscale, which in this case is surprisingly crisp. The concept of having two screens on a phone feels unnatural and will take a bit of getting used to. Yota recommend using the e-ink panel as much as possible to save that much more battery life, but this will require a change of habit. This change wouldn't be as jarring if it weren't for the refresh rate and the responsiveness of the e-ink display. It's good, but it's slow and can feel slow to register presses, and for those presses to even take effect. More often than not, you also get that flicker. The slowness doesn't bother me so much, but here you're trying to use the back panel as if it was the front, and that hurts the display. We have certain expectations using devices in this sort of manner. It's a trade-off at the end of the day, and I'm sure Yota had to balance design and usability. Despite any usability issues with the e-ink display, it still looks great. Pictures look great, especially black and white images, and Yota have done well to manipulate the display to make it work with the rear e-ink panel. A word of warning though, the display won't be sufficient for those looking to do anything more than reading or using slower paced apps. Watching videos and playing games won't be a good experience at all. The e-ink display works best if you're using it for glanceable info and notifications. You can answer calls, check to see if you have any emails, texts, and it's surprising how good that feature is, especially when such a technology is based around the ecosystem of your phone. The best part of these e-ink displays is that it works great outdoors. Long have we lived for this. Powering the two displays, we have the Snapdragon 800 running at 2.2 GHz. The phone has 2 gigs of RAM and comes standard with 32 gigabytes of storage. It's a curious choice for sure, but it doesn't hurt the device as the phone runs fine most of the time. One curious hit to the performance was the keyboard. Trying to type often resulted in some sort of lag which queued up a bunch of characters. If it wasn't that, then it was the incorrect detection of keys, often thinking I was swiping or typing something else when I wasn't, even after trying different keyboards. The problem persisted even on the e-ink panel via Yotamirror. Given the hardware of this device, it should be more than capable, so I don't particularly understand why this was happening. It's displeasing as it impacts the very nature of using a smartphone. Hopefully this can be addressed in an update. Contrastingly enough, everything else works just as you'd expect it to. The system runs well and fluid, with the app switching being snappy. Thankfully, the hardware components have a pretty vanilla build of Android to play with, and for it, it's pretty speedy with no OEM skin weighing it down. We have Android 4.4.3 here, and Yoto have said Android 5.0 will be coming at a later date. It should be exciting to see what updates we'll see in regard to the back panel. The phone comes with only a minimal amount of app bloatware, which is thankfully all removable. The rest of the apps are taken up by Yoto's own suite of apps designed for the e-ink panel. We have Yoto RSS, which works through Feedly, there's Chess, Checkers, Sudoku, 2048, and finally there's Yoto Reader. This supports EPUBs, text files, but not PDFs, which was slightly disappointing. It's not all bad, as you can use any app that you want through what Yoto call Yotamirror. This essentially passes the screen through to the rear e-ink panel. You'll lose some detail in the conversion, but this way you can bypass any limitations of the applications that Yoto provide. Even though the apps aren't tailored for the e-ink display, it's a good function that increases the usability of the device. However, if you use an app that requires a lot of refreshing, you may end up using more battery life than you would with the front panel. There's Yoto Snap, which takes a screenshot and sends it straight to the back via a swipe gesture from the nav bar. The implementation is good and works well, which could really help you should you need some information to stay. The nice thing about this is that, as with anything using the e-ink display, is that whatever you send will stay there, even if the battery dies. Yoto calls this life after death. There's Yoto Energy, which is a battery saver mode that cleverly utilizes the e-ink display in a way that other phones can't. It limits the CPU frequency, turns off every wireless radio, lowers the brightness, and more. Yoto claim that with Yoto Energy on, the last 15% of your battery life is equal to 8.5 hours of operation. I tested this with 10% battery and it lasted me 6 further hours. Not bad going. Finally, there's the Yoto Hub, which consists of Yoto covers and Yoto panels. Yoto covers add a nice sense of personalization to the phone in what is essentially a lock screen. You can get to this by tapping the icon on the bottom to quickly bring the cover down. This addresses the always-on nature of the display in an easy-to-use manner, which should please those that are concerned with the privacy of this device. I mean, it's superficial, but the small ability to display whatever you want as your permanent image shows a nice difference to the current sea of devices out there. Yoto panels offer glanceable widgets and shortcuts to contacts and other apps that are made and rendered for the e-ink technology. You have up to 4 screens with varied grid size presets to customize. Problem is, you can only see what widgets are available once you've chosen your grid size, meaning if you want to have another widget, you have to go back and change the grid size. It's all a bit unintuitive. On the plus side, having these apps makes logical and essential sense for the rear display, elevating it from merely just a panel to something offering genuine cases of usability. During the launch event, I was told that there would be an SDK available. So far, we have seen an official Twitter widget which works on the Yoto panel. I only hope that this SDK will be pushed forward, as the software is only good as the apps and the functions available for it. We have a good start, and whilst this technology isn't quite perfect yet, this device can really carve out something for itself. Contrastingly, I did encounter a few odd issues. Namely, I could unlock the front screen with a swipe gesture, mimicking the unlock action that you use on the rear e-ink panel. The issue was sporadic, but it kept reoccurring. There's no mention of this anywhere as an intended feature, so I'm inclined to believe this is a bug. Moving on to the rest of the phone, there isn't much left to say as the phone is pretty basic. The camera we have in the Yotaphone 2 is an 8 megapixel shooter, which is lower than the 12 which was found on its predecessor. I'm not sure whether this is an actual downgrade or if there's a better sensor. There's a 2.1 megapixel front-facing camera, but you may find yourself not using it much due to Yotamirror. With the rear display, you can use the main camera as the front-facing camera due to the ability to cast the main display to the rear panel. This allows you to shoot a better picture. Otherwise, when you're using the camera normally, the rear display will display a nice smile. The sound on the Yotaphone 2 is poor, but that's in comparison to today's standards. Fortunately, it's not as bad as the speaker on my Nexus 5, which I've never really liked. The audio is louder, doesn't clip, and has a touch more depth. have a 2500 milliamp battery supplying the power to the Yotaphone 2. Battery life was always going to be a point of contention given the rear e-ink panel. Suffice to say, the phone topped out at around 3 hours and 55 minutes on a video loop playing 1080p via software decode on full brightness. In general use, I averaged about 8 hours of battery life. I'm less inclined to use the phone though, partly due to the phone offering very little, but also because I'm using the e-ink panel more. I'm checking my phone many times a day, and most of that can easily be replaced by the e-ink panel. This has no doubt saved a lot of battery life. The Yotaphone 2 is made with a unique screen. I have to commend Yota on making it into a really nice, neat little package. This is a great selling point, but choosing to have components from a past generation, a satisfactory camera, and audio capabilities which are only a touch above disappointing, I find it really surprising just to see how high that price point really is. Yota are asking for £555. Yes, and in Europe it will be 699 euros. For example, you could buy a Nexus 5, which is essentially the same spec phone, and a Kindle, all for £338. Sure, it doesn't have the integration of dual screens, but I don't think it deserves the premium they're asking for. Even still, I'd like to see this phone out there. I want to see it being used by developers, as I believe there is some real potential with this concept. It's on sale now in 20 countries in Europe, the CIS, and the Middle East. Later in 2015, they'll slowly be launching in other markets such as Asia, the USA, Canada, and Latin America. To be honest, it's a good device, but I can't help but think that this would be nothing without the e-ink panel. The phone itself is pretty basic and doesn't offer anything new or even relatively interesting. You may find yourself using the e-ink panel on the back and being quite happy with what the technology can offer. Not necessarily this particular implementation, but the rest of the phone needs to be just as good, if not better, so that both feature sets can provide an attractive package. The e-ink display is a nice one. It works well with 16 levels of grayscale, static pictures and texts look great. I mean, it's just awesome having a screen that is always on and uses very little battery life. The software controlling this is slightly more restrictive than I initially thought. Small touches as being able to change the 4 icons on the dock would be a start. The potential here is really large, and I just hope this SDK is pushed forward, as more apps and customizations will only help this sort of technology. It's not as intuitive as it should be. The refresh rate and latency was never really going to work well when using it like a normal phone. It requires a different form of usage. That and the previous niggles I mentioned earlier, I hope will be solved by future software updates from Yota. But hey, at the end of the day, it's all going to be down to just what you're looking for. And if these features run well with you and you can live with some of the idiosyncrasies of the device, then I think the Yotaphone 2 will be a good choice. It's a well-made phone and overall represents a very good idea, and I'm happy with that, but in its current state, it's only just a good device and not something I can recommend based on that, but also the very high price point. Thanks for listening, guys, and Merry Christmas. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. If you did, give us a thumbs up, and be sure to check out all the amazing content on AndroidAuthority.com and the YouTube channel. And stay tuned to Android Authority, because we are your source for all things Android.